give the opportunity to share the Dhamma. I am in Myanmar at the Chamyemyai Meditation Center near Pion Luin in Upper Burma, where we usually hold our annual metta meditation retreat. And this year it's kind of special because Sayadaw U Indaka, Ariya Nani, my American nun friend, and myself, we are here at the center, but we're teaching online. So all the meditators are in their homes all around the world. So it's a privilege to be here. I'm here in the meditation hall with the beautiful Buddha statue behind me. So as I've said, the topic of today's talk is the infernal trio: greed, hatred, delusion. And I want to start with the recitation of the Namo Tassa. You may join at home. You and everybody make sure that the microphone is turned off. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. So we all live in a free country and we have the freedom to do what we want. But actually, we are not as free as we think, because there are some bandits who make us believe that we are free. And who these bandits are, I will say in a minute. You know, for example, we think I am free to have a cup of coffee whenever I want. Or thinking I am free to eat chocolate whenever I want. Or else I am free to read the news online whenever I want. So let's have a look at one of these examples. Let's take the one with the freedom to eat chocolate whenever I want. Maybe you are not into chocolate. Maybe for you it's the green olives or the potato chips or whatever it might be. So, you know, is that real freedom? Or is it not only a conditioned and habitual pattern in relation to wanting, greed, or craving? And looking at my life, I have come to see that I have been a victim of these bandits very often. And I still am a victim, because I thought that my freedom consisted in fulfilling every wish in order then to be happy. So let's go back to this example of wanting to eat or having the desire to eat a piece of chocolate. So the sequence of actions is very simple. First of all, there is this desire to eat chocolate. And this desire might have been triggered by an ad for chocolate that we have seen, or it might have been just boredom, or we remember having eaten that beautiful dark chocolate, which was really very delicious. And so once this desire to eat chocolate has come up, then the mind immediately starts to figure out how this desire can be fulfilled. Let's say we are at home and we know there is some chocolate in the cupboard, then the body almost automatically gets up, starts walking into the kitchen, opens the cupboard, takes out the chocolate, breaks up a piece of it, and then starts eating it. After that, the desire is fulfilled, the experience was pleasant, and so we feel happy and satisfied. So in this sequence of actions, there has been very little freedom, but there has been a lot of strong and habitual patterns. In other words, we are dominated by these habitual and compulsive patterns, or we are the victims of these bandits, the victims of this infernal trio. And this infernal trio is nothing other than greed, hatred, and delusion. So delusion or ignorance, that's the boss of this infernal trio. And he has two very able helpers, namely greed and aversion. If the boss, the ignorance, didn't exist, then also his helpers would not exist. So if ignorance would not exist, then greed and aversion would not exist either. So if we want to become really free human beings, we have to put a stop to these bandits. Because as long as this infernal trio can exercise their influence, we are not really free. People want to be happy. And in order to be happy, people think that things need to be a certain way. The way they like it to be. But reality also shows that the world very rarely matches our expectations and hopes. And so to have high expectations and having narrow views of what constitutes our happiness, so this is a very sure source of dissatisfaction, disappointment, and suffering. Because the world does not really care about our preferences, wishes, or hopes. So making our happiness dependent on the fulfillment of our wishes, of our desires, then we will choose after happiness for the rest of our life, indefinitely. Somewhere in the scriptures, the Buddhist scriptures, I read that human beings or unenlightened human beings should be regarded as crazy or mad. So here we are, a bunch of crazy and mad people. But at least I think every one of us is trying very hard not to end up in the psychiatric ward. So in order to escape this madness, this craziness, we have to overcome our deep-seated ignorance. So we have to give up our conventional ideas of what constitutes happiness. We have to give up these ideas for once and all. So we have to come to realize and see that true happiness is not out there in persons or in things, situations. It's not out there in the perfect partner. It's not out there in the perfect cappuccino. It's not out there in the beautiful sunset. It's not out there in the expensive car. It's not out there in the holidays on the island of Bali. So let's have a closer look at these bandits, at the Infernal trio. The first of them is greed. The Pali word for it is lobha. And lobha stands for all forms of greed, wanting, desire, craving, and attachment. And in the Buddhist scriptures, its nature is explained as stickiness. And the traditional illustration of this stickiness is a piece of meat that sticks to a hot iron pan. You know, today or nowadays, there are Teflon to do a piece of meat. There is these special pans with Teflon, you know, where the meat will not stick. Another way to illustrate this stickiness of lobha has been shown to me by an Australian meditator who had been meditating in Sri Lanka many years ago. And there, his meditation teacher, a Sri Lankan monk, had illustrated the stickiness of lobha in the following way. Apparently, the teacher had put the hands together like this, locked the fingers, the hands like this, and then, you know, trying to pull the hands apart. Apparently, the teacher went on and on and on, you know, to say, yeah, that's the stickiness. A nun had to translate for the teacher, and after some time, she turned over to the teacher, the monk, and said, Bhante, I think this is enough. Anyway, it made a lasting impression on my friend, and as he has shown it to me in a similar way, it has left a lasting impression on me. Another way to illustrate this stickiness of lobha can be demonstrated with the monkey trap. In some places in Asia, they use a special trap to catch monkeys. And I like this illustration very much because it's so easy to understand. So this monkey trap consists of an empty coconut shell. The lid has been cut off, and at the bottom a hole is made and a string attached. And then the string is attached to a tree. And then one puts sweets into the coconut. And apparently monkeys also like sweets. So then when the monkeys smell the sweets, they go and put their hands into the coconut, grab the sweets, but then, having now a fist, they cannot pull out their hand because the hole is too small. It was big enough to put in the open hand, but now as a fist with the candies. And so in this way, the monkeys are simply trapped by their desire, clinging, holding on to the sweets. If the monkeys could let go of the sweets, then they could pull out their hands and then they would be free. But of course, the monkeys hold on. They don't want to let go. But yeah, letting go. This is what the teacher, the Buddha, other teachers throughout the ages have said again and again. True happiness and peace of mind is found by letting go and not by holding on and clinging. For example, another way of illustrating this. Here I have a hanky and, let's say it's something very precious to me and so I hold on to it. I don't want to lose it. I don't open up my hand because then I lose it. So clinging to it, holding on to it, that's the way to use it. But actually, it just needs a little movement, turning the hand, then I can open up the hand and the hanky is still with me. I don't lose it. So, I can use it, make use of it. It's helpful, but I don't need to hold on to it tightly. So it's like the magic word is letting go. Letting go of craving, of wanting, of desire, of attachment. And the Buddha had also stated it very clearly when he said, nothing whatsoever is worth to be clung to. So not even clinging to the highest piece of the highest form of peace or happiness. If you still cling to that, then you're not really free. Ajahn Chah, this famous teacher from the Thai forest tradition, he has passed away some years ago. So he had said, if you let go a little bit, you will get a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will get a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will get complete peace. Now let's go to the second member of this infernal trio. And this is it's the flip side of wanting, craving, holding on. So it's aversion, ill will, hatred, enmity, and so on. And the Pali word for this is dosa. Dosa includes all forms of hatred, ill will, enmity, from the most subtle forms of not liking, irritation, to the most obvious forms of strong hatred, ill will, anger. Lobha, wanting, great attachment, is like the hand stretching out, wanting something, holding on to something. Dosa is like the hand pushing back something, it's not wanting, it's pushing away what causes the aversion, the ill will, the anger, and so on. The nature of dosa, all forms of anger, aversion, and so on, is described as being harsh and rough. And as we know very well, dosa very easily develops into forms of violence, of cruelty. And dosa, of course, is also a mind-altering emotion, which can have devastating effects on our ability to think clearly and make appropriate decisions. You know, incredible harm and misery is created through anger, aversion. Usually, when a person gets upset or angry or is irritated, the person is very quick to find, the cause of their anger, or to blame, and then to blame somebody else or the situation. So for people, the cause of their anger is always out there. Something else, somebody else. So then the person blames the neighbor, the traffic jam, the weather, and so on. But actually, the real cause for our anger, aversion, is never outside of us. It's always within us, in our heart and mind, based on our ignorance, our delusion. So some years ago, when I was at the meditation center in Mobi, outside of Yangon, Sayadaw U Janaka's meditation center, I was translating for the foreign meditators, taking care of their needs. And at one time, we had an English man, a meditator, who was quite fussy about things. And he was of an aversive nature. So, when things not work in the way he wanted them to be, he got upset, and he needed this and he needed that, and things needed to be in this way and in that way. And at that time, being here in Myanmar, things that were easily available in the West, they were hard to come by or not even available here in this country. And so whenever he went to the office and asked for this or that, and then they said, well, we cannot organize that for you, or when it took 3-4 days, he would get upset and angry. And so one day in the morning after breakfast, he came to my kuti, my little house where I was staying, because he had a question. Okay, I am back. The connection here seems to be a bit unstable. Let's hope it stays stable. So then what I said to this English meditator was, anger is never caused by anything external, but anger arises because there is ignorance in the mind. Of course, this was not what he wanted to hear. So he simply turned around and walked away. Then the third member of this infernal trio, this is ignorance or delusion, not knowing. And the Pali word for it is moha. Moha is the boss of this infernal trio, and without him, his two helpers, Loba and Dosa, would not be there either. And so the biggest concern of the boss of Moha is to be discovered, because if things are seen as they really are, then ignorance can no longer exist. So in the light of understanding and wisdom makes moha disappear into nothing. I just see there is the Englishman's question. Well, it was the Englishman, blaming this and that for his anger to arise. And so my answer was saying that anger arises because there is ignorance in the mind. So this ignorance, the not knowing, moha, this is, for example, not understanding the three characteristics of life. You might be familiar with the three characteristics. They are impermanence, the fact that things are not lasting, that they change, that they are fleeting. That's anicca in Pali. Then there is dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, unreliability, or suffering. And the third one is anatta, not self, or the impersonal nature of things, or the fact that we do not have an absolute control over our body and mind or external things. Or else, there is also the ignorance, the not knowing, not understanding of the Four Noble Truths. The Noble Truths of dukkha, that there is suffering, unsatisfactoriness. Then the truth of the cause of suffering, which is craving, tanha, or wanting, desire, attachment. Then the truth of the end of dukkha, or nibbana, or being free from greed, hatred, and delusion. And the fourth truth being the way leading to the cessation of dukkha, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. So ignorance, delusion, or moha, this is the root of all kinds of dukkha. And based on this basic ignorance, people engage in all sorts of activities, all sorts of actions, which are usually based on greed, wanting, desire, or aversion, not wanting, hatred. So when the Buddha talked of ignorance, not knowing, it was not the ignorance of, for example, not knowing the sequence of the months. Mine, she has a son, and when he was, little, he never knew the sequence of the months. He didn't know that after January comes February, after February comes March. But, he grew up, he has made his way through life. I don't know if he now knows that after February comes March. Or else, it's not the ignorance that takes Switzerland to be a part of the United States. A long time ago, that was in 1988, it was my first time in Australia, and I took a bus from Sydney to Brisbane, and next to me was a young Australian girl. She was about 16 or 17, and she said that she was a nanny in a family in Sydney, and that she was going home to Brisbane to visit her parents. And so, we were talking about this and that. And then she asked me, which country? I said, I'm from Switzerland. And then she said, well, in which part of the US is Switzerland? So, not knowing this is not what the Buddha referred to as ignorance or not knowing. But what the Buddha called ignorance, not knowing, is this very basic wrong view of who and what we are and what the world around us is. So how can we stop the disastrous activities of this infernal trio? Basically, we can be mindful. Unfortunately, there is no quick fix. If there would have been one, the Buddha would have told us with his big compassion. But what the Buddha gave as a remedy to overcome this basic ignorance is the practice of mindfulness, the practice of insight meditation, to get insights into the true nature of all that exists. And, this is the domain of Vipassana meditation. In Vipassana meditation, we are mindful of these processes happening in our body, in our mind, observing sensations in the body, pains, thoughts, sounds, emotions, and so on, in order to see the true nature. And so, among other things, we come to see that these processes in the body and in the mind are impermanent. They come, are present a little while, and then disappear. Whether it's the physical sensation or thoughts, emotional states, they come and go. They are not permanent. Or else, we might have a painful sensation in the back. It's unpleasant, painful, and, we would like to get rid of this pain or any other unpleasant, painful, thought or emotion, whatever it is. But, we cannot simply decide that the pain in the back be away, or that this challenging emotion disappear. We do not have this absolute control. So here we come to see the impersonal nature of all these phenomena, the not self nature, the uncontrollability. There is kind of a superficial control. We decide to do this and then we do that. Like deciding to be here for this online teaching. Yeah, a little bit of control is there. But, on an absolute level, we miss this control. It's not there. And that shows the impersonal nature of all these phenomena. And, time and again, we come to see that, all these experiences do not give us lasting and reliable satisfaction. So even, the most beautiful moment, enjoying a sunset or a nice cup of tea or a pizza, whatever, it's nice and we are happy and it's pleasant, but it will not last for the rest of your life. It will pass away. It will disappear. Situations will change. And so this is what the Buddha called the nature of dukkha, unsatisfactoriness. So with being mindful of these processes, seeing them as they are, understanding their true nature, then, with this understanding, we can remove a little bit of the greed and wanting, can remove a little bit of the aversion and hatred, can remove a little bit of our basic ignorance. But in relation to the big mass of greed, hatred, and ignorance that there is, if just a tiny little bit is removed, this seems to be negligible, doesn't seem to make a big difference. But if the practice is done repeatedly, again and again, then gradually we can notice that greed, hatred, delusion become less strong. The Buddha took the example of a carpenter using an axe. Carpenter uses the axe every day to work with, but after 1 day or 2 days, he does not notice that the handle of the axe is worn down a little bit. But after half a year or a year, the carpenter will see that there is a little, dent in the handle, that it has been worn off. And so in this way, we can see and we can trust and understand that, each tiny little bit of greed that has been removed gives space and room for non-greed to arise. Non-greed being generosity, gratitude. And each tiny little bit of aversion, hatred that has been removed gives room for non-aversion to arise. And that's loving kindness, compassion. And each tiny little bit of ignorance that has been removed gives room for knowing, understanding, or insight to arise. And so one day, the day will come when all the last traces of greed, hatred, and ignorance have been removed. In other words, then we are fully liberated from the infernal trio. Ignorance can also be compared to a thick veil that prevents beings from seeing what is really there. And sometimes I think it's not only a thick veil, but it's a 1 meter thick concrete wall. Of course, this takes time and effort to remove and wear down. At the time of the Buddha, there was a wanderer, an ascetic, who was not so familiar with the Buddha's teaching, but he heard, that the Buddha's monks and nuns were talking about Nibbana. So this wanderer approached Venerable Sariputta and asked, or said, here you are always talking about Nibbana. What is Nibbana? And then the Venerable Sariputta said, the destruction of greed, the destruction of hatred, the destruction of ignorance. This is called Nibbana. So Nibbana is nothing other than a state of mind in which the infernal trio has no longer any influence, or a mind in which the infernal trio no longer exists. And this is a state where we have completely been liberated from the infernal trio. And this is the true freedom. So with this, I finish this Dhamma talk, and I invite you to ask questions or comments on this. We have about 20 minutes.
Okay, I have a question. Yes. Hello, sister. This is Jose. It's not a question on what you spoke about. It's a question. Are you right now? Did you mention? Maybe I misunderstood. Are you now in Myanmar? Are you now in Switzerland?
Right now, I am in Myanmar.
You're in Myanmar, so you were able to go to Myanmar at this moment.
Yes, it's possible. It's possible to get a visa.
Okay.
So I took this opportunity to be here.
Okay. Okay. No, interesting. I live in Malaysia for now. I am interested in going to Myanmar. I was there a long time ago to do a Vipassana course in Yangon, the Vipassana course based on the Goenka school. But I'd be very keen to go to the monastery that you mentioned. Are they accepting guests right now, or is it very hard for people like me to get a visa to go?
You know, it's possible to get a visa, but at the moment, the situation here in this country is not so good.
Yes,
and
I know.
Actually, the center does not accept foreign meditators. You know,
Okay.
Sayadaw,
Okay.
the teacher, made an exception for myself and Ariya Nani to be here, because, you know, we have been living a long time in Myanmar. We are familiar, you know, with the situation, and we know, you know, where to go, what to do, or where not to go and not to do. So, but yeah, right now, the center where I am does not accept foreign meditators.
Okay. Actually, here in Malaysia, I am a volunteer. I'm a volunteer teacher at a center for children from Myanmar, from the Chin tribe. So I'm very familiar with the suffering, because the children I teach all come from very difficult backgrounds. You know, their families have been killed, or they have to separate from families. Some of them are here with their mother or father. So when I go there, every time I hear a tragic story of their plight in Myanmar, and they're here because they've been forced to leave. That's why I have this special close link to Myanmar, because of my volunteer teaching. Have you thought about maybe since foreigners cannot go, and since you were there, have you thought about like offering like an online meditation course spread over several weeks or several months? Is that a possibility for you, or for the monastery where you are?
Well, actually, right now, we are doing an online metta meditation course.
Okay.
But because people from all around the world take part, the online session is for 1.5 hours every day. And for the rest of the time, people practice at their home.
Okay. Is it possible to join this course, sister?
Yes, well, it has already started, and so it's no longer possible to join.
Okay. When is the next course?
Next year.
Next year? Oh,
yes.
It's so far away.
Well, actually, it comes up. So, you know, as we do the online session, if you want to be an auditor for these teachings, as an auditor, you can join.
Okay.
You know, but then you will not be in an interview group and have interviews. But, you know, to be present at the online session, that's fine.
Okay. And I'm sorry to monopolize the conversation. Just this course, when did it begin and how long is the course? Because I would be very keen on doing it next year.
Usually the course starts on February 6 until February 20. And there's actually the first course, January 16 to January 30. It's 2 times 2 weeks of metta meditation.
Okay.
So, you know, if you are interested, then I will write my website into the chat.
Yes.
And there you have an email address on the contact where you can contact me. And anybody else who is interested, you know, can contact me through my email address.
I will check the website and I'll contact you directly, sister. Thank you very much for the information.
So now the email, the website is out. So any other questions, maybe in regard to the infernal trio? Greed, hatred, delusion.
Ariya, Ariya.
Yes.
I have a question. How do you reduce a person's anger or hatred during a confrontation? Because during that time they'll be so, their anger is so built up that they are not listening.
Can you go closer to the microphone? It was hard to get all of your words.
Can you hear me clearly?
That's better.
Yeah. How are we going to help a person to reduce their anger or hatred during a confrontation?
Okay. Well, you know, when you notice there's anger, aversion in a conversation, so what you can do is, of course, reduce your anger and aversion. So noticing, you know, that you might be a bit angry or aversive. So then, you know, to realize that and consciously, you know, put the anger away and try to speak from a base of metta, of kindness, of, you know, non-aversion. You know, it's still, you know, mentioning facts and say, you know, this is not right, and or I never did this, or, you know, it's like that. But, you know, coming from a place of non-aversion. If the other person is angry, upset, of course, you cannot change the other person. But by not responding to the other person's anger with anger, you know, you can calm down the situation. And if you can stay, you know, kind, then the other person might also calm down with her anger and aversion.
Thank you.
I have a question, Ariya.
Please?
I have a question to you, Ariya.
Yes, please, go ahead.
The basic cause of suffering are known as the 3 poisons: greed, ignorance, and hatred. These are often represented as a rooster, greed, a pig, ignorance, and a snake, hatred. Why is so that represented? Sadhu.
Yes,
Sadhu.
that's a good question. And the answer to that is, I don't know. I know this representation, is in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. In their tankas, one sees in the innermost circle, the rooster, the snake, and the pig, representing the three poisons. But how these three animals came to represent these three qualities, I don't know. Maybe somebody else knows, but I don't know. And I have never come across a place in the Pali canon, like the words of the Buddha, where he used these three animals to represent the three poisons. Might have been a later development, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition.
Thank you.
Somebody else? Yes? Thank you for mentioning that. We have to understand we live in this world, and on the relative level of living in this world, of course, we have to develop some skills, and we want to learn a skill, or the desire, the wish to learn a skill or do this or do that, also to make a living, to care for ourselves, to care for our families and friends, or for other living beings in this world. But, for doing all these activities based on, wanting to do something, we can take the frame of the precepts as a point of reference, so that we do good and that we do not hurt or harm. You might be familiar with the 5 basic precepts, ethical guidelines that the Buddha proposed for a virtuous life, not hurting and harming other beings nor ourselves. And we also can notice that, lobha, craving, wanting, or tanha, the craving, the desire, these have always, are unwholesome mental states. It's this stickiness, this wanting, it has to be that way. But there is another mental factor that is called chanda, which has not that stickiness of lobha, and which is usually translated as wish, the wish to do something. And so chanda, when it is directed to something wholesome, to something beneficial, then, that's not the problem. So to engage, in virtuous conduct, to engage in generosity, to engage in, social welfare work, and so on. This is based on chanda, and this is not an unwholesome state, so it doesn't create unwholesome karma. I see there is another question up here. How does one work with annoyance, aversion, even when you know it comes from within and not outside circumstances? Metta, to patience with oneself. Yes. So recognizing that annoyance, aversion, comes from inside, whatever the outer circumstances are. And so the first step is always to recognize, I am annoyed, or I am aversive. And You know, in your day-to-day life, when you are alone, you could, you know, take some moments to notice, to observe the annoyance, the aversion that has arisen in you. You know, kind of the mindfulness, vipassana approach. Just observe it, note it, annoyance, aversion, and so on. You know, to understand, to see this texture of roughness, ferocity. And, you know, then it might weaken, disappear. If you are with other people or engaged in a conversation or working with somebody and aversion arises, annoyance, you know, again, notice it. But because there is not the time to observe it, you know, you cannot say to the other person, sorry, you know, I've just noticed annoyance has come up, so wait a minute. But in that case, it's better to replace the annoyance with metta, kindness, or compassion, or patience, or metta and patience. So to actively replace the aversion with something beneficial, something wholesome. So it seems there is no urgent question arising, so then it's 8:30 here now in Myanmar, 10 o'clock in Malaysia and Perth, I think. So with this, we'll close this session. And what we like to do is to dedicate and share the merits. And I will add a Burmese metta chant. So all the merit, all the goodness that has been created through listening to these teachings, to put the teachings of the Buddha into practice, the teachings of generosity, of virtue, of the cultivation of the heart and mind, meditation. May all this goodness, may all these merits be a supportive condition to become completely free from the infernal trio, to be free from greed, hatred, and delusion, and to realize the highest happiness and the deepest peace. And we share all this goodness, this merit, with all living beings. May they too become completely free and live in peace and happiness. Alon tatawatvi Dhamma jabasi chanda jabasi Kosia ginjabasi Seisia ginjayaya asimpye jabasi. Thank you for being here and for your precious and valuable practice of the Dhamma.